Who has impressed? Who is already causing concern? And what the heck is going on with all of the injuries in the NBA? I'm joined by Marc Stein, DLLS's Marc Stein, also of Marc Stein's Substack, to talk about those very things. Marc, how you doing tonight?
Adam Madas. We're taping this at night, which means I am great. Love late nights. Love that DLLS is in a string of post games. We got
So
we got
true.
like 4 games a week stacked on top of each other. I'm fine. It's early season for these NBA teams, but the late nights will get me to mid-season form quick.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm enjoying these nights as well. And we had a full slate going on, but we're going to talk about today right now. And some games are still going on, but we're going to talk about the teams through 1 week, a little bit over 1 week of basketball that have impressed us the most. I have my list. You have yours. Why don't you go first? Who do you think has been the most surprising or impressive team out the gate?
I've got to go Thunder. I think Boston would have been a natural answer before losing to Indiana just before we came on here. And then Cleveland 5-0 start. Everybody kind of scoffed at the Cavs early schedule, but they just took care of the Knicks and the Lakers. So, they've shown us something here. But I got to go Thunder, man, honestly. And it's not just because they were pounding San Antonio just as you and I got together here. I mean, it's typically early for statements. Like, can you really make a statement in week 1 or even week 2 of a season that's as long as the NBA's? But I would say the Thunder coming into your city of residence and winning on opening night with no Hartenstein, like that was a statement. And when I woke up this morning and looked at advanced team stats around the NBA, which is the kind of nerdy thing that I like to do,
You and me
and the
both.
Thunder are okay, it's insanely early, but as early as it is, when a team is allowing 91 points per 100 possessions, again, as early as it is, that's still just a really impressive number. So for the Thunder to play the way they are, they've had some injuries too. This kind of start, it's impressive isn't enough to be
Yeah.
honest.
Because it's everything, right? It's the individual glow up that we're seeing from Chet Holmgren. It's the development of some of their young guys, the way they've worked Caruso into it right out of the gate. And then, Marc, they're not just winning, they're killing everybody. They're dominating everybody, including some good teams. So I think it's a great pick. And it's funny because they came in as the favorite to win the Western Conference. And yet, so we're almost looking relative to expectations, and yet they look more dominant even
Yeah.
than what I think you thought. Like they're not going to, it looks like not just the 1 seed, but maybe a runaway 1 seed. So I think it's a really good pick. And I think we're going to talk about them here a little bit later when we talk about some of the trends in the NBA. And they might be setting a new blueprint in some ways about how to develop under the new salary cap rules and different things. So I think it's a great pick. I went with the Golden State Warriors. And give a hat tip right now to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Got to talk about them on this very show very soon. There was a couple other teams, Boston, even the Clippers made my list, but the Warriors coming into tonight, and hopefully they don't blow this and make me look terrible, but coming in tonight, we're 3-1, and they have played, I believe, 13 different players, at least 10 minutes per game in 3 different games. They lost Curry, still get a dominant win. They're cycling different guys into the rotation, trying out different combos. And for a team that came into the year with a lot of question marks, you lost Klay Thompson. Is it a new era? They have really looked good. Now, they've had a somewhat soft schedule, but they are playing a brand of basketball that you can believe in. They're so small. They get a lot of threes up. Lindy Waters has been a revelation. They're just Pajemski looks like he's leveling up. They've got a lot of guys that they're playing through right now and having success with it. And more than anything, losing Klay Thompson, you wondered if the style would change. The ball is popping and the threes are flying as much as ever. And I didn't expect it from him. I thought this would be a bit of an up and down year. It's only 1 week, but they look really good. And they look like a team that we might be talking about all season long.
Well, it's interesting. Buddy Hield has been off the charts for them as a shooter to help them try to move on from the Klay Thompson era, which that's as much emotional as it is on the floor, just because
Yep.
Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green were together for so long and won so much together. But I remember in the offseason, the way a rival executive put it to me was, Okay, yes, the Warriors lost Klay Thompson, but they are deeper and cheaper. They
Right.
have a much deeper roster, and they have set themselves up to make some kind of down the road big splash, and they will. I mean, they showed you in the offseason by going after Paul George, by going after Lowry Markkanen. Okay, they struck out on both, but that gives you a glimpse of the approach that they're going to take. They're going to keep swinging until they make a move eventually to get an all-star, a younger all-star to pair with Stephen Curry, who looks ageless. Steph's going to be
Right.
30, I think it's 37 in March, which just sounds crazy to say out loud. But they're not done. They're going to keep looking, and they've given themselves a lot of optionality with the roster they have, and they are definitely interesting. They are, I had them coming into the season as my sixth seed in the West, and that was probably higher than most because
Yep, for sure.
I saw what you a lot of the things that you just said. I think if Stephen Curry is mostly healthy and there's no indication that this injury he suffered is super
Right.
serious or anything, he'll be reevaluated Friday. As long as Stephen Curry is out there the bulk of the time, they're gonna be a tough out in the West.
Absolutely. And they're doing the thing. Like I said, if you are wanting to make a big trade for a Lowry Markkanen or a player of that caliber, you've got to get some of your young prospects up to snuff so another team is interested in them. Well, what do? Pajemski's developing. Trace Jackson Davis is looking phenomenal. Moses Moody is on the upswing. They have young players that they're investing in. Kuminga is the guy everybody talks about, and he's maybe the one that's a little tumultuous, but they've done a good job of bringing some guys in who I wasn't thinking of 2 years ago, and now I'm looking at and going, hey, I don't know, Trace Jackson Davis is pretty good. If we go to the unimpressed side, though, the flip side of this coin, who did you come up with?
I really wanted to go Denver because I wanted to work you into, and I think maybe you probably even thought I would, but
I thought you would.
uh, Jokic is just so damn good that
He's
there are
good.
problems there, there are issues, and I'm sure
Yeah.
you have had a roller coaster week with 2 home losses and then 2 come from behind wins against the dregs of the Eastern Conference. So
Overtime, no less.
I'm sure you're edgy, but I'm not going Denver. Look, tonight
All right,
alone,
thank you.
Atlanta lost a second straight game to Washington. Memphis Memphis lost both Desmond Bain and Marcus Smart to injuries after Monday night. John Morant couldn't play, so it's just been an injury-riddled start in Memphis. I mean, I could go with teams like that, and the big question for a lot of people who do what we do has been who's been more disappointing, Milwaukee or
Yeah.
Denver. But I'm actually going to go Philly. And okay, maybe I'm prisoner of the moment a bit because they lost to Detroit tonight before we
Yeah.
lost at home. But I mean, I don't care about the player participation policy. I don't care about the fine. I don't care about the quotes. The fact that the season has started and we have not seen Joel Embiid or Paul George yet, it 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 has to be alarming. And the other thing too, the East. I just mocked the bottom of the East, but 1 through 8, the East is no picnic.
Yeah.
And Orlando has taken a leap. Cleveland, as we said, has looked fantastic. Cleveland is in the
Yep.
running for most impressive team in the league so far. And Indiana hadn't really lived up to expectations until tonight when they dealt the Celtics their first loss. That middle section of the East, or that whole chasing pack after Boston, it is deeper 1 to 8 in the East.
Yep.
So with the Knicks and the way they fortified, Philly has to be asking itself and just wondering what kind of roller coaster season are they in for if you don't have Embiid and PG. And look, they're going to come back, but it's just a matter of, how much are they going to get out of those guys in the regular season?
And how much strain does it put on the other guys? I mean, Denver ran into this last year with Jamal Murray missing so much time, and you think, well, as long as he's ready for the playoffs. But what happens is everybody else has to go about 10% harder in the regular season, and then you get to the playoffs and they're exhausted a little bit. So you look at that, Tyrese Maxey is playing a lot of minutes. I think he's near the top in minutes played. You got a lot of guys trying to pick up the slack, and it's not working. Morale obviously can fall down. So I do look for the return of Joel Embiid and Paul George. But to that point, we're starting the season this way. It's one thing if you're 10 games in and you say, well, we expect injuries, you expect this. When you start that way, it's almost like the clock is still at zero. It doesn't mean they'll be healthy in game 20. You're already starting from a point from behind. So I think it's a really good one. And as you mentioned, though, it is early enough. Yes, they drop a game tonight. What are they, 1-4 now, I believe? So they drop a game tonight. It's not too late or anything like that. But at a certain point, if you go 1-6, you start to look at it and go, that takes 2 weeks to catch up. When you go 1-6 to catch up to where you think you can go, minimum 2 weeks. And they're already starting from that point. So I think it's a good one. It wasn't on my list. I made a list of a handful and they weren't on it, in large part because I think the injuries were a little bit of a freak of nature type things. But the team that's on my list also suffering an injury, but it's the Milwaukee Bucks. And I thought last year there were plenty of excuses that I would buy into. Changing a coach, you bring Damian Lillard over. He had, moving cities and all the things going on in his personal life, building new chemistry, dealing with injuries. It made sense. But this year, everything we heard out of camp was the guys really connected. This is a year Damian Lillard's really in shape. We're really going to put this together. But when you watch him play, I still see a team that doesn't seem to have great chemistry, doesn't seem to have a good vibe. And for as great as Dame and Giannis are, it still feels like you're putting $2 together and getting $1.50 out of them. They're not blending. And yes, it's only the beginning of the season. Middleton hasn't been around, but they're a team that I look at and I'm a little worried that pairing might just not be what we thought it was all along. And again, some of the quotes that have come out from Giannis about this team has no identity. Who are we? What are we doing? Is everybody trying to play defense? There's just quotes out of there that make me think the vibe is a little low there, more than I thought it would be.
Believe me, they're worried too. It's not, and you easily could have, I easily could have gone with Milwaukee as well because they've already lost some winnable games. And yeah, it just, it's like with Philly, it's not just the fact that Middleton hasn't been there, it's the uncertainty.
Right.
Like
Yep.
the Sixers don't just miss Embiid right now. Like when are we going to see him? Nobody can say that. How long will it take for him to get to peak condition? We don't know that. And it's the same thing with Middleton, that there just seems to be such a lack of clarity about how much Milwaukee can depend on him. And the Bucks are so desperate for a wing defender. And it just makes you wonder, when Middleton is back, they're going to be asking him to do so much. After all the ankle problems, can he deliver what they need? I mean, they need an infusion of wing defense, and that's probably going to take more than just a Middleton comeback. So, yeah, I think Philly and Milwaukee share a lot of the same concerns. And again, it has to do with, okay, in the East, you do have a lot of teams at the bottom that you can pick up wins against, but 1-8, when we come into a season and everybody's saying the Miami Heat are going to finish 8th, it tells you that 1-8, it's a no-joke conference. And it's just, where are Milwaukee and Philly going to land in the standings at the end of the regular season? And how tough of a playoff road are they going to see?
But Mark, you've been around for a long time, and I'm wondering about this because people ask me about this with Denver. Like, is it over? Is the whole ride over? And I don't think it is with Denver. I think they still have belief. They're going to fight through it. There's some bad stuff, behind the scenes. It's a little shaky or what have you, but I don't think it's a team that feels like it's over. But I look at Milwaukee and I wonder if they think that, if they just look at it and go, yeah, it's just not the same as it was before. You've been around teams, and I'm sure you've witnessed this firsthand when a team looks around and goes, this isn't going to happen with this group. Do you feel like, what are the signs like when that happens? And do you feel like Milwaukee is anywhere near that?
Well, I think the main difference when we put these teams under this particular microscope, like And I think I mentioned this the very first time we did a pod this summer, wherever I was, somewhere abroad. And it's like, what would we give to know Jokic's innermost thoughts about where the Nuggets are, how he feels about the roster building? And Jokic is just never going to give us that.
Yeah.
Like, everybody went, like, lost their mind when he said, we're a streaky shooting team, because for him, that's like a really critical comment and very rare. And it's just Jokic doesn't apply that kind of pressure to the organization. Whereas Giannis, I don't know if it's perception or reality, but certainly the perception is that the Bucks are under all this pressure to make Giannis happy, so he wants to stay, even though Giannis hasn't said something that dramatic. But let's face it, the actions tell us. And the minute Damian Lillard was available, they went to go get him because, and look, it did lead to Giannis signing a contract extension.
Yep.
So just by virtue of that, it was the right move to make. But they lost Drew Holiday in the process. And I just think, fair or not, the Bucks, they're the ones that face this they're constantly under this microscope of, is Giannis happy? Are they doing enough to keep him? Is he? And it's like, that's the chatter, and maybe it's just external. There are no indications right now that Giannis is applying some sort of pressure to his team, but I'm just saying that's a storyline and a dialogue and a line of questioning that the Bucks are constantly subjected to, and the Nuggets are not. And right off the bat, when we were talking about the teams that we've been impressed by and we're worried about, Jokic is that calming influence, because like everybody just thinks he's going to deal with whatever happens and just keep playing MVP ball. So by virtue of that status, that should give the Nuggets some solidity to kind of cope with this bumpy start. Whereas in Milwaukee, it's a daily referendum on the Dame Lillard trade, Doc Rivers as coach. It's just a much more difficult dialogue that they have to put up with.
I will say with Jokic, everything's true until it isn't. And I think that I'm with you. There's no signs of Jokic wanting out, but at the same time, he is a 3-time MVP who's carrying a heavy load, and you never want to take that for granted. Denver certainly should not take that for granted as well, because things in this league can change on a dime. If we move on now to talk about injuries, sadly, every year injuries are part of the story, but this year, Kawhi Leonard, probably not surprising. Joel Embiid, Paul George, maybe not surprising. Porzingis, we knew coming into it. Middleton, Hartenstein, DeJounte Murray, Bogdan Bogdanovic, who I actually think is a sneaky big loss for Atlanta. There's just a lot of guys. We're 1 week in, and I just gave you an all-star roster of players that have already missed significant time or will miss significant time. So when you look around, what do you make of the injuries this year? And is there one or two that you feel are most impactful on the teams that they're with? Obviously, Philadelphia.
Well, it was a week into camp, and I did a column, and the headline was simply "Injuries Suck," because a week into camp, we were looking at a slew of injuries, and then I had to do it again Tuesday, because just since then we saw Hartenstein, we saw Strus. Even before I could publish on Monday, we got a Kyle Kuzma's out. We got the Bogdanovic update, Steph Curry situation. Again, the Grizzlies, as I mentioned. Today, Scotty Barnes. It's just on and on and on. And on one hand, listing injuries, lamenting injuries on some level, it doesn't do any good. But I guess my approach is that sometimes just talking about it makes us feel a little bit better, because it does. It absolutely, like, this October it's been bad. And, it's hard to pinpoint clear-cut data on it, but Jeff Stotts, who keeps In Street Clothes, he's the best NBA
count. Yep.
out there. And so I was asked, right off a weekend, I'm like, man, this just, I'm not looking at this scientifically. This feels awful. A week into the preseason, he had already had his Excel spreadsheet for injuries was up to 70 injuries. By the time preseason was over, he had cataloged 111 injuries, which was actually a few less than last preseason. There were 119 separate injuries last preseason. But then the game started, and Jeff's injury tracking. The first 6 days of the season, last season, 118 man games lost to injury. This season, 150 plus. And look, I think the real experts in this field, and I am not, but the real experts in the injury tracking world, the injury prevention world, I mean, the feeling is that it's a multitude of factors that are at play. But certainly one of them, and Jeff mentioned this, and I totally agree with it. Every position on the floor, every player is asked to cover more ground than they ever have
Yep.
because offenses get so spaced out with the threes. That's another one of the great early stats of this season. Last season, we only had one team average 43s per game in the regular season. That was Boston, 42.0. When we woke up this morning, there were 10 teams averaging at least 43s a night, with Boston in the 50s. So the three ball is just being taken more and more and more. The ground that has to be covered at every position, guys are, bolting out, hard closeouts, immediate stops, and that is certainly one of the factors. But again, I'm not trying to sit here and present myself as some sort of injury expert, because I'm not a medical expert. I'm really just, I've written about it twice in October just because, again, it sucks. I mean, and honestly, Monday night, Utah at Dallas, and Taylor Hendricks.
Oh no, yeah.
Like, I mean, as you like to say, I've been doing this for a long time. This is my 32nd season. That is honestly as gruesome an in-game injury as I've ever seen in person. And the kid's 20 years old, man. And you just feel sick for him.
Yeah.
It just absolutely, that was so rough to watch. And so ideally I would be able to say, hey, we need to propose A, B, and I'm not smart enough to, propose the fixes. And I am trying. I try to talk to the true experts in this field and learn as much as I can. But I mean, it's just
Yeah.
the injuries. It's
Yeah.
it's been a daily story all month. We are not, Halloween this is
Yeah.
airing on Halloween, but the whole month of October, on top of any good thing we've talked about in this league, we've been talking about injuries.
Well, I like your point because I have heard it before. Denver had a slew of adductor strains. And I just remember going my God, I never even heard of an adductor. And half the roster has had an adductor strain in the last 6 months. And I remember talking to somebody and they're saying, yeah, that's a twisting muscle. There's a lot of, you got to come to the center. You got to sprint out. I think, and that's when I first heard this idea of the pace and space era is putting a unique strain on athletes' bodies that we really have never seen before. And it's possible that was it. So I think there is something to that. And, you said, what can we do about it? I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but I do think, is Anthony Edwards taking 12 threes a game a good thing for the entertainment? I don't know. We have to weigh all of those things, the stylistic similarities across the league. Is it good or bad? You weigh all of that. But I think the injury should also be part of a way that you weigh there. Is this also, in addition to making maybe a homogenous style product, making the game a little too hacked in a way that audiences aren't loving, but also does it up the injuries? I think all of that should go into the soup when the NBA looks and says, do we have a healthy direction that we're headed as a league? And that should be part of the equation. But nonetheless, the injury part of this, there is something up. And I wanted to ask you this. I'm in Denver. I don't travel, but I'm in Denver and I see all the different teams that come through Denver and how their training staffs operate. There is a wide range of training staffs across the NBA. Some guys, they bring truckloads of equipment and they're in the hallways and they're doing all this stuff. And some guys, they got a jump rope and, some icy hot, it seems. What is the gap, in your opinion, in your experience, between the teams that seem to be ahead of this and are like, hey, our health of our athletes is so important and we have to be ahead of the curve with all the new movements in the NBA? What is the gap there? Or do you feel it's actually not that wide?
Honestly, I think everybody is trying to get on top of it because it's so important. I mean, but that's just That's what's so vexing about it. Everybody's load managing. The preseason has been dramatically reduced. For the first 20 plus years of my NBA journalistic career, everybody played 8 games in the preseason. Legs and
Right.
I talked the week that we did the episode without you. Everybody's playing 4 or 5 exhibition games now. The stars don't even play in those games. The
Yeah.
travel is reduced because the league has reduced back-to-backs and mixed in the baseball series. So teams are traveling less, playing less back-to-backs. The preseason is less taxing. The equipment is better than ever. The training staffs are as big as the rosters, and we're still seeing injuries to this level. And so that's what makes it so daunting that, I like, again, this on one level, I mean, again, I'm not trying to, I do not want to paint myself as some sort of medical expert, but, I just went to the Hall of Fame, and I do the same thing every time I go to the Hall of Fame. And I just marvel at they've got the pair of shoes, in many of these Hall of Fame displays, they have the shoes. And Larry Bird, the shoes he was wearing in the heart of my high school years, racking up MVPs, and like these shoes look so flimsy and just like we got the stuff, the equipment is so much more advanced. The travel is everything is
Yeah.
better,
And yet they're hurt. Yeah, it
but
doesn't make sense.
injury prevention is so complicated. And again, every team and every decision maker in the league office, they want to unlock the secrets of injury prevention. And I'm not sitting here making it sound like it's easy and they're just not doing it. But the sorry for the rant, but I feel so bad for Hendricks, and just
That
watching
was rough.
that on top of everything that's happened this month just kind of got me in this mood.
Were you there for that game? Did you say you were on the ground there? So you were on scene. That was tough, man. It was tough, and it might be the most gruesome one that we've seen. And we've seen some tough ones. Sean Livingston comes to mind. That was a tough one as well, but this one might have taken the cake. But you talked about teams trying to figure out health and being ahead of the curve. Another reason, this is the last topic here, ahead of the curve right now on the new salary cap, because when I look around the league, you talked about parity in the East. There's going to be a good team at the 8 seed. Parity in the West right now. They're juggernaut on top, but there's parity. I look around and I go, most teams have a pretty weak bench right now. And that's a thing that I'm seeing across. Not every team. There are some teams that don't. But a lot of teams, most teams, it seems to have about 6 guys, 4 to 6 guys they really trust, and a handful of guys that are a little shaky. And I'm so interested in the teams that are investing early. Oklahoma City's doing this. Boston, they're afforded to do that because their team is so good. But teams that are trying to play big rotations, the Warriors, we mentioned this, and development, almost like a college basketball program treats development like, yes, we're going to play our seniors and juniors, but we're going to bring along our other guys and give them minutes so that they can play and be ready when their time is up. I look around the league and I see teams are handling that part of it very differently. And I have a feeling with these new tight restrictions that make it so hard to build a really deep roster, I think the teams that are going to succeed are the ones that invest in October, November, and December in the guys that they're going to need, not just in April, but even in years to come. They find minutes for them. Do you hear anything about that around the league? And are you noticing a similar trend?
Not quite to paint it exactly like you have, but I mean, look, roster filling out roster spots have never been more precious. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that when you see Lonnie Walker
Right.
go to, because the Celtics just couldn't afford to keep him. And shout out to my guy Keith Smith, one of the absolute sharpest guys out there in terms of salary cap matters. And he wrote a great piece recently on Spot Track about how the 15th spot on rosters is increasingly being left open because every single dollar has to be watched when you are dealing with the first or second luxury tax apron. So, like, you look at the Knicks and the roster dance they have to do, where, the Knicks this season, where they have such high expectations, but like they're going to go the maximum 28 days this season, having only 12 players, because those 28 days, they only have 12 instead of 14, makes that much of a difference when
Insane.
dealing with the tax apron. And then you have a team like Oklahoma City, which for now still has the good fortune that
Right.
so many of their good players are young that they haven't had a chance to go get those big contracts yet. And it's just, it makes their situation a little bit easier maybe to, to have a deep squad. But then I think about the city where I live, where the Mavericks, they thought, all the time, I can't remember how many times we brought this up on DLLS about this could be one of the deepest Mavericks teams we've ever seen, maybe the deepest. And it just hasn't played out that way early in the season, that the bench has been very up and down. And on Monday night against Utah, Jason Kidd played 11 guys in the first quarter, not because they're so deep, because he's still looking for combination. So
Right.
I think it's too early in the season to really call that a trend or to identify a trend. But yeah, look, you're seeing it that teams, they have their 3-2 ways. They're going to use those 3-2 ways and sometimes have to keep that 15 spot open just because it gets so pricey with the luxury tax dollars involved. Like Lonnie Walker, okay, he's going to Kaunas in Lithuania and has an NBA out to come back. He's an NBA. I mean, it's laughable to even have to specify that he's an NBA player. But it
Right.
just shows you again, I just think end of the bench spots have never been more precious in the league.
Well, as we sit here right now, there's a minute left in the Oklahoma City game, and AJ Mitchell has, let me see here, what has he got? He's got 12 points, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, and 5 of 6 shooting in 21 minutes. They played 10 guys tonight before garbage time. And I just look at that and I go, those are going to pay off. Down the road, it's going to pay off. And the teams that are going to their 9-man rotation now, night after night after night, if you're not winning, I mean, if you're stealing wins, okay, so be it. But if you're not winning, you're going to find a point in the season where you look around and say, did we develop? And I just think every team's going to be in that scenario at some point. But like I said, Oklahoma City's a great team. They keep winning. They can afford to do that. Not everyone can. But I think that's a storyline that'll play out. Marc, this was good. Guys, we're going to be doing this, every now and then, these extra little bonus mini pods, not a full pod, but mini pod on some great topics. Marc, you were a great spot as always, man, on this show. I really appreciate you hopping on.
Always good to be with you guys. We will do it again soon.
We'll do it again soon, everybody. Hit that like button for us on the way out. We'll be back with legs tomorrow. We'll see you.